In this project, we're going to take this relatively large TV that sits on our bathroom floor and make a lift for it. The idea is to store it in a cabinet so it doesn't sit on our floor in the way all the time. I looked at a couple different ways to do this. I thought about building my own lift, but the lifts are relatively cheap, only a couple $100, and it would cost me probably that much to make all of the gearboxes and everything. But the ones that I found, they wouldn't go as low as I wanted, so this first part is just cutting some aluminum bar to modify the lift that I bought. You'll see in a minute, all I'm doing here is attaching it to those rails that you see going up and down in the video. That just really drops the TV by another 4 inches or so. Other than that, this lift worked out really great. The box itself that holds the TV lift is pretty simple. The base is 3/4 inch plywood. You see me cutting that with my homemade track saw there. And then the frame is made from 2x3s. I did that to save a little bit of weight as opposed to 2x4s. This is just a shot of the chop saw station cutting all of the 4 main rails to the same length. And once all the frame pieces are cut to length, I brought them over to the table saw and just squared up the edges. What I'm doing here is removing the rounded corners of those 2x3s. I find that if you're trying to build a nice square or a nice rectangle, it's nice to have nice sharp corners. It makes everything come together a lot more cleanly. And then I screwed together all the sides. This is just using, 2.5 or 3 inch interior grade screws. I do all this on my build bench there because it's nice and flat. That way everything remains square. You can see measuring the diagonals here to make sure it actually is square. Lots of clamps holding it in place to make sure it all stays where it's supposed to. And with the frame done, start cutting out some of the luan to put around the frame. And no magic here, just lots of glue, lots of brads. There's nothing very difficult about this build, but just the size of it was a bit of a challenge, especially in my small shop space. Just moving everything around, I found I had to shuffle furniture and often get help to flip the thing over in between steps. Same technique for the side panels. Just glue and brad with luan. A lot of these luan projects, there was someone that was moving to a different town and had a stockpile of 1/4 inch plywood, and they were trying to get rid of it, so I got a lot of that for free, so I'm trying to work through it on various projects. Next we move on to the trim. This was kind of the fun part. So similarly, another person that was moving in town had a lot of these pine boards left over, so I ripped those to about 2.5 inches, and I used those to not only make the outside look a little bit fancier, but it gives a lot of structural integrity as well, having that solid pine run up and down. Similar techniques here, just using longer brads to get the trim attached. And here you see a shot of the finished box. At this point it's very solid. You can see I ran a couple of boards across the back, but there's still some exposed joints, as you can see on the top there. So then I spent an evening just cutting some very thin trim pieces out of those pine boards and attaching those to the top. And the real point here is to just hide all the ingrain. So instead of seeing the edge of plywood, you'll see some solid wood here. It'll look a little nicer once it's painted. It was really fun trimming all of that out. Had a good time doing it. Then of course sanded all of it, maybe to 220 or so. Then I turned my attention to the lid. The lid of this box will get pushed open by the TV lift and then close once the TV is hidden. You'll see that in the final part of the video. For that I cut some channels into these pine blocks, and those channels are really to accept the plywood. It's kind of like a typical cabinet you might see in a kitchen. You can see I have those luan panels and they're fitting into the slots of the 2x3s or 1x3s. The only part I wish I had thought through is I put those channels all the way to the end of the board. So at the edge of the lid, you can actually see the slots. Something I would have done differently if I thought it all the way through, but I was kind of designing on the fly here. The biggest challenge with this lid was the glue up. So there are, I don't know, 5 pine pieces and 2 Luan pieces that all have to be assembled at the same time. You can see here, this was a part of the glue up here, so I had to get glue on all of the surfaces, assemble it quickly. There's wax paper under it so it doesn't stick. And it all went to, according to plan, it stayed very flat because I glued it up on top of the cabinet itself. And after lots of sanding, I wanted to put some feet on here, so I cut off some pieces of the 2x3s that I used before, cut them at an angle, give it a little bit of style, and then just attach them with some 2 or 3 inch screws from the bottom. You can see the finished cabinet here with the feet on it. This concluded the main cabinet build part of the project. It was nice to have that done. Still needed hinges on the top, but I like the way the trim looks on the outer edge of the top. After that, I took it out in the backyard, got out the HVLP gun, put in some semi-gloss white latex, I believe it was, and gave it 4 or 5 coats. It took 4 or 5 coats to really hide all of the knots of the pine. And I'm glad I sprayed it. There were a lot of nooks and crannies to get in. After that, I realized I needed a spot to bring the cabling in. So you need the coax for the TV, you need power for the TV lift, and also power for the TV itself. So I made this big enough to pull a power strip cord through. And here's the finished product. You touch the remote and the TV pops out of the cabinet. It's nicer than watching a TV on the floor. It actually puts the TV about eye level. And when you're done with it, you push the remote and it hides it away. I like the look of the cabinet. I think it could use some kind of graphic or color on the big panels on the front. But that's something we'll do in a future project. Here's a peek from the back. If you look inside, you see the TV lift motor down on the ground there. Just a power strip for the TV and the motor itself. And the white cable's the TV coax. There's a small bit hook on the top to push the top open. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed.